So this could be the death of me, or maybe just a better me, by darker in the day. Chapter 3, in which Stephen Grant saves Jake Lockley. It goes wrong. Of course it goes wrong. Something always does. But quite frankly, Jake didn't really expect it to go so wrong. Then again, it's Paris. Everything goes to crap in Paris. Without the threat of a premature judgment day looming over the world, Jake largely stays local, hanging around the London streets, beating up the odd thug or robber, being the friendly neighborhood Egyptian God-sponsored cape-wearing vigilante, if you will. On the rare occasions that Khonshu sends Jake to other countries, it's to catch the big fish, or so Khonshu puts it, to mete judgment out to those who think they might escape them. Something like that. Honestly, Jake tends to tune out whenever Khonshu starts talking. There's something about the deep hum of primordial power that makes for very good white noise. Stephen gets home on Thursday evening from a long shift at the museum. Both him and Mark head to bed pretty early, Stephen being exhausted from his day job, and Mark still emotionally taxed from the was it real or was it not ordeal he went through in the alleyway. It gives Jake more time than he normally has to walk around the flat, tapping fish feed into the tank for Gus 2 and towel wet, because no way in hell he'll make the same mistake Mark did and let the fish die. They're possibly the only things holding Mark and Stephen's sanity together. He gets to rifle through the fridge and pantry a little, as well as make himself a coffee the way he likes it, which is 2 shots of espresso and a copious amount of foam. Neither Mark's stoic and predictable Americanos or Stephen's sweetened lattes really do it for Jake. And sure, Jake could make use of his free time to do some more fun, adventurous things, but it's nice to stick to some normality. It's nice pretending he's part of the family for once. He sits at the dining table, sipping at his coffee, absent-mindedly flipping through a book on Egyptian hieroglyphs that Stephen left out. Beside it is a pad of sticky notes and a pen. Mark uses it to make little notes to tuck into Stephen's books, notes reading, "This guy looks like an asshole. What's a segment?" And of course, Stephen, look at the penis. To which Stephen wrote back, "Mark, are you 9? It is the quiet of the night. It feels safe enough for Jake to admit to himself that he'd be lying if he said he wasn't jealous of Mark and Stephen sometimes. That it doesn't sting a little to watch them joking with each other easily, as if they've been aware of each other their entire lives. Mark makes tea in the morning for Stephen before the other has to go to work, and Stephen buys Mark's favorite takeout on Wednesdays because that's when the best chef is on shift. If Stephen oversleeps, Mark gets ready for him, waking him up gently once they're safely on the bus. If Mark doesn't feel up to facing anything or anyone, Stephen fronts for days at a time without complaint. They're each other's best friends and mutual protectors, and Jake. "No sé nada," he mutters to himself, and in the quiet of the apartment, it's too loud. Jake loves them. How could he not? Mark and Stephen are the only family Jake's ever had. Unlike Stephen, Jake was never under the delusion that his mother was alive or loved him. Unlike Mark, he's never had the comfort of meeting Layla, of knowing that even if he loses everything, he'll still have Stephen. It's easy to convince himself that he's fine with staying in the background. Jake Lockley, lone wolf, fist of Khonshu, he doesn't need anyone. He has friends. He has a purpose. He has a place to stay. What more could he need? At the end of the day, though, Jake knows full well that's all baloney. Jenna and Frenchie are good company, yes. Being Moon Knight is cool sometimes, sure. He'd give it all up to have Stephen and Mark like him. But ultimately, he's afraid. And afraid might be putting it lightly. No, Jake's downright terrified of what it'll mean if Mark and Stephen find out about him. He's seen Stephen's horrified reactions to Mark's history back when Mark served Khonshu. He knows how much Mark loathes himself for the things he's done, and Jake's the epitome of the things they hate. He's the violent one, the brutal one, because he was pretty much created to be that way. It hurts being alone, but if it turns out Stephen and Mark hate him, Jake doesn't even know how he'd deal with that. There's a familiar hum in his mind, and then Mark's voice. "Stephen?" "Mark," Jake says lightly, easily slipping into Stephen's British accent. It's not the first time he's done it, pretended to be either one of them for a few minutes. It's the only way he's ever been able to talk to them. "Why are you awake?" "Could ask you the same," Mark murmurs, sleep-dogging his words. "Just doing a bit of light reading." The book is still open in front of him, so it's a convincing half-lie. "Of course you are. But you at least do it on the bed. This kills our back man." "Yeah, all right." Jake closes the book gently. Get back to sleep, mate. You didn't have to tell me twice. And within a minute, Marc's gone, and the flat feels emptier than ever. Khonshu appears a few hours past midnight while Jake's browsing Netflix on Steven's laptop. They don't have a family plan, so Marc and Steven share an account, which means the recommendations are jumbled enough that Jake can add his preferences into the mix without having to worry about being detected.
Jake,
Khonshu says, appearing as the others halfway into Red Notice. Jake likes Ryan Reynolds. He reminds him of a guy he knew back in New York, a certain mouthy merc dressed in red.
It's time to go.
They just finished stealing Cleopatra's second egg, Jake says over a mouthful of chocolate stolen from Steven's stash. Your timing is terrible, Theo.
Cleopatra did not have eggs.
Khonshu says, bewildered.
She was just as human as you are.
Well, okay, but minus several layers of inbreeding, right? Jake pops one last chocolate into his mouth, pausing the movie.
We are leaving,
Khonshu announces, decidedly ignoring Jake's comment, which usually means he agrees but doesn't want to admit it. They go up to the rooftop, where the moon curves a slender crescent in the sky. The brisk air of London at night combs breezy fingers through Jake's hair, and he takes a moment to listen to the sound of life echoing around the streets, the raucous chatter of pubs, the rumblings of the underground, the bustle of the city. It's no Brooklyn, but hey, it's still kind of home.
Summon the suit,
the god commands, and Jake lifts his arms out. His armor is different from Marc's and Steven's, of course it is. If Khonshu wasn't so hell-bent, on vengeance, he could have a stunning career as a fashion designer. Instead of clean white, pitch black encases Jake's face and limbs, leaving his arms and chest bearing the usual moon white. A pale cape billows out behind him, connecting to his arms, and he clambers onto the ledge of the building, looking at Khonshu expectantly. What are we waiting for? Vamos! If skulls could roll their eyes, Khonshu would. The god of the night sky lifts his staff. The moon shines imperceptibly brighter over an oblivious city. Jake leaps off the building, and then he's flying. London shrinks out of sight as he soars above the clouds, city lights dimming into distant glows and eventually fading away entirely in the distance. Up here, there's no constant chatter of the city. It's just him, the moonlight, and the sound of wind buffeting his suit. And Khonshu, he's jarringly reminded as the god's voice comes in his head.
Your mission is a man who thinks himself important enough to have relations with those who don't want it.
It takes a moment to unpack that. Jake narrows his eyes. He's a rapist?
Yes,
Khonshu says bluntly.
He abuses those under his power. Men, women, children. Not once has a finger been laid on him for his actions.
Disgust rises in Jake's throat, anger coating his tongue like bile. I'll kill him then.
That is the plan.
Khonshu agrees, plain and simple. The two of them agree easily on matters like these. It's possibly why, despite his unpredictability, Jake's always been Khonshu's favorite. In the same way a child would have a favorite toy to play with, Marc never liked inflicting pain, and that's why Jake came into play, to shield Marc from the worst of it, the guilt and suffering. It also means Jake was practically built for this. He's not evil. That's a distinction many people don't make. The difference between a willingness to commit violence and a compliance in malice. Jake hurts those who deserve it, and he takes pleasure in it, but never would he touch someone without reason. But was he?
A movie director, not so famous abroad, but very much so here. He will be at the Louvre this morning, before leaving at noon. You must act fast.
Don't get your feathers all ruffled now, Big Bird. I got this.
I did not understand that.
It was a compliment. A couple hours later, Jake lands somewhere in the outskirts of Paris, his armor immediately shifting back into civilian clothes. Being an hour ahead, France's sky is already streaked with light pink and orange. It'll be sunrise soon. And then Paris will have to deal with Jake Lockley. The problem with arriving at dawn is that the Louvre opens at 9, which leaves Jake with 4 awkward hours to wander around Paris. It's awkward for 2 reasons. First of all, he very much does not speak French. He can read French, somewhat, given his fluency in Spanish, but speaking or understanding it is out of the picture. Secondly, for some reason, Khonshu keeps popping up unexpectedly. It'd be funny if it wasn't Jake who had to entertain him.
What are you doing?
Conchu asks as Jake stops at a park and takes out his burner phone, sitting down on a bench. Texting a friend, he replies, not looking up.
Conchu hums. You have friends.
Throwing his hands up, Jake leaps to his feet and stalks off. He may or may not be muttering a prayer in rapid Spanish under his breath. He's not Catholic, not even remotely close. He manages to get in contact with Frenchie eventually, and they set up a plan B just in case Jake needs somewhere to lie low after the Louvre. Then all that's left is for Jake to grab breakfast, drop by some thrift stores, and formulate some semblance of a plan. The Louvre has strict security measures, so Jake won't be able to bring weapons in. No guns, no knives, no weapon-like objects. That's no problem. He doesn't need weapons. No large bags are allowed either, so Jake finds an old messenger bag on sale and packs his stuff into it, and heads off to the museum right as it opens for the day. He buys a ticket, rents an audio guide, and goes through security without a hitch. Conchu appears after Jake enters the Louvre.
Follow me.
Not a lot of people can say the words, "An Egyptian god helped me case the joint for a vengeful murder," without causing a polygraphed self-destruct, but Jake's one of the lucky few. Said murder-compliant Egyptian god eventually leads him to a bathroom, gesturing with one bony hand.
In there.
The cameras? Jake pulls his gloves from his bag.
Taken care of.
Muchas gracias. Gloves on, Jake pushes the door open and slips inside. He doesn't see Conchu follow, but given his liking for bad people suffering, the god's definitely present. The film director is a portly, middle-aged man, the only person in the entire room, leaning over the sink and rinsing his face off with cold water. Jake takes one disdainful look at him and moves to lock the bathroom door. The soft click echoes across the room, and the man looks up from the mirror to find Jake staring at him. Qui êtes-vous? His voice is wary, as it should be. Even without proper weapons or the armor, Jake can be quite intimidating when he wants to be. Leaning against the wall blocking the exit, adjusting his gloves so the moon insignia gleams in the fluorescent lighting of the bathroom, he says, "I'm a messenger." And he must have guessed the French correctly because the director's eyes narrow. Que voulez-vous? Sorry, Pat, I don't speak French, and I don't think you're talking about the ABBA song. Jake straightens himself up and cocks his head. But now that we're talking ABBA, what do you think of "Lay All Your Love on Me"? De quoi parlez-vous? The man demands, there's sweat beating on his bald head. Jake can almost hear his heartbeat pounding out of his chest. Because you did, didn't you? Jake takes a step forward. Another. One more as the man shrinks back as he approaches. On all those children you worked with. All those vulnerable people. Laid all your fucking love on them. Did Jake start off the day meaning to terrorize a sexual predator with ABBA references? No. But, as they say in Paris, c'est la vie. Les es muy tranquille, the man tries. No estoy tranquilo, Jake hisses, grabbing the man by the collar of his fancy shirt and slamming him against the wall. Now you're going to listen to me. A little bird told me you've been bad, director. S'il vous plaît, the man whimpers. Then in broken English he says, "I have money, leave me, please." Jake barks out a harsh laugh that makes the man wince. Oh, you think you can buy me out, cabron? You think you can just pay your way out of all consequences, huh? Bought off all those actors and actresses, told them to keep their mouths shut? Pathetic. You're not worth the shit I scrape off my shoe, pendejo. He's not sure how much of that the pervert understands, but the message gets across, it seems, well enough. Who are you? The man wheezes, barely comprehensible over his thick, terrified accent. I asked a fucking question, see? Jake takes his right hand off him and swings a hard punch right at his nose, snapping the man's head sideways. Blood trails down his face, but Jake gives him no respite before both hands return to grip the man's shirt collar, slamming him back up again. How many? Quoi? How many did you hurt? Jake smiles sweetly. Come on, director, dame un número. And it's enraging when the man can't come up with an answer immediately, when he has to think about it. 30. And it's close enough to Spanish that Jake understands. 30. Did they ever ask you to leave them alone? He repeats it in Spanish for good measure, and when the man cringes away, Jake raises a fist in warning. Oui, he whispers, a smirk hiding coppery rage. Thank you for your honesty. For a second, Jake's grip loosens. For a second, the man's eyes light up, believing he's off the hook. But then Jake's gloved hands close around the offender's neck, and the cabbie tisks in mock sympathy as the other starts choking, face quickly going red. Tell me to stop. Come on. Beg me to stop. Just like all those people beg you to stop. Regame. I didn't think... The man chokes out, clutching at Jake's arms. Stop! Stop! Jake grins, and his grip only tightens. Now. So, the mission itself goes well. The getaway, not so much. 3 minutes after Jake leaves the bathroom, there's a loud, frightened yell that echoes out into the museum. Pulling his coat up, Jake starts walking away faster, but not before he hears the sound of footsteps rushing to the bathroom. He doesn't speak French, but he catches the words "Miltre," "cet homme," and the sound of "revu," and breaks out into a run because he knows enough Latin from Spanish to get an idea of what they're saying. Risking one quick glance back, he sees at least half a dozen security guards on his tail, with the one at the lead speaking furiously into a comm. Oh, fuck. Jake reaches a staircase, leaps off the banister, and vanishes into a hallway displaying large Renaissance-era paintings. Footsteps still echo behind him, but at least he's lost them for now. As if the situation isn't dire enough, something stirs in his mind, a very distinct presence making itself conscious. A familiar British voice asks, Marc? Panic and frustration coil in Jake's gut as he pulls off his hat and stuffs it into the bag hidden beneath his coat. Not now, Stephen. It was easy keeping himself a secret from Marc, back when he was also hiding from Stephen. Now that the two of them are comfortably aware of each other, it becomes much, much harder for Jake to keep inconspicuous, especially when a mission lasts longer than a night. This, it seems, is his reckoning. Marc? He hears Stephen ask again, and Jake has to make a very hasty split-second decision. Yeah, Jake says tightly, flattening his Brooklyn accent into a more indistinguishable general accent. Where are we? Are we in a museum? Why are we running? Stephen, listen, just... Shouts come from behind him, and Jake almost stumbles when he makes a sharp turn into another exhibit. This one is thankfully empty. Turns out no one's particularly interested in costume designs from the Edmond de Rothschild collection, and he gets a blessed moment to catch his breath. Marc, what's happening? Not now! Jake snaps, and his Brooklyn accent slips through, and Stephen pauses and, oh, for fuck's sake! You're not Marc. Stephen's quiet, suspicious, too goddamn smart for his own good. Sighing, Jake concedes. No, I'm not. Are you another alter? Fuck it. Yeah. Are you dangerous? Jake pauses. Yeah, he absolutely is, but not to you, not to Marc either. That's definitely not a no, and Stephen notices it as well, but all he says is, ISIS. Oui, still allé. The voice is carried down the hallway a little ways outside the exhibit room, but not far enough away for Jake to make a run for it. Not for the first time, Jake curses Conchu for sending him to a place where both his languages don't apply. Where did he go? Stephen supplies, and Jake blinks. You don't seem like you speak French. I don't, thanks. You're all right. We'll talk about things later, Stephen says determinedly. And you're going to explain everything, but for now we get out. Right on. Stephen pauses for a second. We're in the Louvre, aren't we? Paris? Yeah, Jake murmurs impatiently. Wow, Stephen breathes. I've always wanted to visit... Stephen! Jake says urgently. Even in such a high-stakes situation, a little thrill goes through him at being able to say Stephen's name without hiding who he is. Right, sorry. From outside the exhibition, a loud voice shouts, London Duns! Don't mean to freak you out, mate, but I think they know where we are, Stephen says nervously. What's the plan? Jake tugs off his coat, tossing it into a nearby trash can, and pulls a checkered vest out from his bag, pulling it on along with a pair of glasses. Changing his gait, he slouches slightly and takes out an audio guide from where he'd stashed it in his bag, slipping on the headphones. There's a woman there, Stephen points out after Jake wanders around for a solid 10 seconds, trying his best to act like an enthusiastic academic. He's in the Egyptian collection now, which is poetically fitting. Keycard, lanyard, suit, name tag. I think she's faculty. What the hell am I supposed to do with that? Jake mumbles under his breath. Make conversation with her. He's suspicion. I can't make casual conversation with museum staff, Jack begins to say, but then he hears hurried footsteps behind him and beelines straight for the woman. Halfway there, Stephen says, Give me the body. Jake narrows his eyes. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. It's our body. If you get in danger, I'm in danger. Stephen points out urgently. I can help. Give me the body. Security gets louder behind him. Jake grits his teeth. Doda. All right, do it. Stephen approaches the woman, pretending to be enthralled by the piece that's behind her, a statuette of Horus. Out the corner of his eye, he glimpses the woman's lanyard, and Jake whistles. Stephen, she's the director of the Egyptology department. Mentally, Stephen nods. Outwardly, he lets out an impressed sigh and turns his head toward the woman as if just noticing her presence, letting his eyes light up with that sort of wondrous enthusiasm that comes with his passion in Egyptology. He pushes the headphones to his audio guide down. Are you familiar with this piece? Stephen says in fluent French, his voice tentative and curious, every part the enamored history nerd. The woman looks at him. Her gaze flickers from his book bag to his glasses, to his audio guide, and back at his face, and must seem to recognize a kindred spirit as she smiles widely. Of course, the statue of Horus. It's wonderful, Stephen breathes, and it's only half faint. Even though he's held an ancient Uchapti in his hands and participated in the indirect destruction of several, it still fills him with giddiness to see a historical relic. Look at the detail in that falcon head. Yes, the Egyptians did have an eye for their Uchapti, the director says appreciatively. Are you an Egyptologist then? Only in spirit, or my ba, I guess, Stephen jokes, and the director laughs. I've always wanted to visit the Louvre. I'm an exchange student studying nearby, you see, and I finally got the chance to come here today. The collection here is truly fantastic. Top 3 in the world, the director says proudly. Well, you're in luck today, monsieur. Spay. Stephen panics. Spay. Smooth, Jake says, sliding into the role of cribby spectator easily. It's a testament to how often Marc does it that Stephen doesn't react at all. Monsieur Grespet, the director repeats. It's a family name. Stephen tries. Jake snorts. You're in luck today, Monsieur Grespet, the director says. How do you feel about the personally guided tour? It's at that exact moment that security rushes into the room and zeroes in on Stephen, who's the only man in that particular room at the moment. Doink! What? Stephen shoots a confused look at the director as the security guards surround him, guns out and ready. He lifts his hands up in surrender, though he doesn't drop the axe. I'm so terribly sorry, but... What are you doing? The museum director demands. There's been a murder, madame, one guard says. And we're searching all suspects that fit the description. What's the description? Stephen asks, trying to hide the way his breath catches at murder. Jake notices, though. Tall, the guard says, lamely. Male. Stephen nods. Not really, now sit down. You can't just go around threatening guests, the director snaps, though she's visibly shaken by the news. Someone was running away. We followed them as far as we could. You should bring them by. I've been talking to this man for a while now, messieurs. He's nothing but a curious student. Is that a crime now? She sighs. For Christ's sake, put the guns down! Can't you check the security cameras? They've all malfunctioned, another guard explains, but they all lower their guns. Jake smirks to himself. At least Khonshu, for all his being a pain in the ass, is good for something. Well, then, you better go find whoever did it. The guards aren't satisfied, but they leave. Besides, if they were looking for a murderer, the scruffy-haired man in a checkered vest with an audio guide dangerously close to slipping off his neck would be their first pick out of a lineup. The director exhales, turning back to Stephen and offering an apologetic smile. I'm so sorry, Monsieur Grespet. We will refund your ticket for the inconvenience. No, that's not needed, Stephen reassures him. It's all right. Thank God you were here. Thank God we're both all right, she says. A murder! Can you believe it? No, Stephen says quietly, and it's not directed at her. No, I can't. They end up going on that tour anyway, both a little shaken, but the deep dive into Egyptian history and culture cheers Stephen up loads. At some point, Marc wakes up as well, and Jake tries his best to hide even further into their mind, even though he knows he'll have to explain things eventually. Stephen? Marc says groggily. Are we at work already? Long story, Stephen whispers when the director turns to chat with another museum visitor. Explain later. We're in France. We're where? Marc sounds instantly alert. Stephen, what the fuck? So, overall the tour goes well. Stephen departs the museum with a personal number of the Louvre Egyptologist director, possible murder on his conscience, and the knowledge of a new altar, and he decidedly does not faint. You gonna explain now? Marc asks, the moment they put some distance between them and the Louvre. Or am I gonna have to play Who Wants to Be a Millionaire to get an explanation?
It's a long story,
Stephen edges. Yeah, okay, but can we start with why we're in France? Stephen sighs, debating between the truth and keeping Jake's identity secret just a little longer, since it's obvious the alter hid himself for a while.
Wish I knew.
What the fuck? Marc says again, almost to himself. So we've officially gone insane? I thought we'd have longer. You're not insane. Jake pipes up, finally.
3 things happen at once. Marc yells, Stephen stumbles, and all of a sudden it's Mark Spector walking the streets of Paris, reeling from the sudden switch, utterly discombobulated, and immediately slamming into a streetlight. Clutching a bleeding nose, Marc groans. If someone doesn't explain to me what the hell is going on, I'm going to take a headfirst dive into the Seine. Actually, it's pronounced Seine, Stephen points out, not Seine.
Marc closes his eyes. I'll drown the body, Stephen. I'll fucking do it.
There's a lot of parks along the Seine, but the Parc des Suez is where they end up.
A park with a name Marc can't even pronounce. During the walk, Stephen and Jake stay quiet. Not because they have nothing to talk about, just because Marc seems too close to hopping in the back of a tour bus if he has to face one more revelation. They reach a patch of grass under the shade of a decently large oak, and Marc sits down on the grass, exhaling slowly. He's mostly alone. There are people around, sure, but they're just milling. He's probably not going to be overheard too much.
Okay, Marc says under his breath, closing his eyes. Explain. An uncomfortably long moment of silence passes before Jake sighs and speaks up.
I come in peace, if anyone was wondering.
Who are you?
Stephen asks immediately, having held the question in for a while now.
Why'd you bring us to Paris? Why did the museum guards talk about a murder?
Murder? Marc blurts, drawing some odd looks. Dios bueno. One at a time, yeah? Jake pauses, summoning his courage. I'm Jake Lockley. I've been around for a while. Great to finally meet you guys. Even though it's pretty clear that Jake's a third older, it still takes a moment for that to sink in. Marc's the first to speak.
How long?
Almost as long as Stephen. Jake tries to be gentle. Tries to. But he hasn't exactly had a lot of practice in that department.
How did I miss? Marc swallows. 30 years?
Give it take.
And neither of us ever noticed.
Stephen wonders. Marc kept himself a secret from you for that long. Jake points out rather bluntly. I just had to hide myself from Marc, which wasn't too odd. I just don't front a lot. Stephen makes a sympathetic sound. It's one thing for an alter to not want to front. To have to not front is a whole other matter. He remembers what it was like for Marc to lock him out. He gets absolutely fucking claustrophobic after a while being trapped in your own body. Still perturbed, Marc shakes his head slightly as if to clear it.
You've been here this whole time.
Yeah.
Have you ever fronted in a situation that we remember?
Here we go. Yes, Jake says vaguely. Marc waits.
And?
I step in when things get too much. Too much for both of you, he adds when Marc's about to say that he can protect Stephen himself. When things are overwhelming, by which I mean when you're about to get killed. It takes a while, but Stephen figures it out first.
You were in Cairo, during that last battle with Harrow in the fight, where we woke up on the cliff.
I was.
You killed those people,
Marc murmured, and there's something in his voice, something wary. Jake doesn't flinch. He doesn't. Yeah. Marc's voice is cold when he asks,
how many have you killed?
I don't just run around killing people, if that's what you're asking, Jake says defensively. I'm not a fucking serial killer or a murderer. I kill when needed, in self-defense, or when can't you. The name sends a shockwave through Marc and Stephen, both recoiling violently, and when they bounce back, they start speaking at the same time.
You're still working with Conchu?
Marc demands. At this point, the passers-by are starting to get more than a little concerned, but they leave him be.
What the hell is Conchu doing here?
He agreed to...
Oh!
Stephen cuts himself off. Oh, bollocks, that Bonio gets! What? Marc sounds confused, possibly over Stephen's apparent revelation, and possibly over the usage of the word get. What is it?
He agreed to let both of us go,
Stephen recalls through gritted teeth. He specifically said both. 2 people. We didn't know there was a third, so...
He tricked us,
Mark rips up a handful of grass from the ground and rends it to pieces absent-mindedly. That asshole, that bastard, that pathetic excuse for a plague doctor costume. Jake offers, and despite his earlier reservations, Mark snorts. That sound of amusement alone sparks more satisfaction in Jake's chest than any mission he's ever accomplished. Sorry, Stephen says to Jake somewhat sheepishly. I didn't know. I would have included you in the agreement if I'd known. I know you would have. Jake shrugs mentally. Don't worry about it. It's not ideal, but I don't owe him anything. He has less power over me than he had over Marc. If anything, he's just kind of a very persistent background noise.
Do you carry out his missions, then?
Mark's voice is quiet, careful. I do. Jake hurriedly tacks on. I mostly stay local, running around London while both of you were sleeping. Ahmed's gone, so he doesn't send me on international runs all that often. Mark's eyes flutter open with realization.
You killed Harrow.
God, Jake would rather take on another group of cultists than have this talk. I did, he admits, and it's the lack of remorse in his tone that has Stephen and Mark shrinking away from him. But Jake doesn't want to lie. He doesn't want to pretend he feels regret for the people who deserved their fate. Doesn't want to pretend that killing traffickers and rapists and murderers brings him anything other than vicious satisfaction.
And in the Louvre,
Stephen ventures in a quiet voice. You killed someone in there too, didn't you? I did, Jake repeats and wonders when he'll be able to get past two-word answers.
Who was it?
Didn't know his name. A film director that abused people working under him. Women, men, children, didn't matter. Jake feels their disgust, cauterizing anger coiling beneath their shared skin. Got away with it for years, because of his fame and money. I made sure he'd never hurt anyone again. Good! He hears the unsaid thought from Stephen and Mark, even if neither of them say it out loud. And it's comforting because it's a step in the right direction of getting them to understand what Jake does, why he does it. Jake takes a deep breath. I'm not innocent. I've done things that don't exactly paint me as a golden boy, and I get that full well. But I have never and will never hurt anyone who doesn't deserve it. I protect the weak and bring justice to assholes who would otherwise go unscathed. My methods may be questionable, but I'm doing the right thing. You sound just like Harrow, Mark sneers, and that's it! In a moment of desperation and anger, Jake fronts all but fully body-slamming Mark out of the metaphorical driver's seat. His body pitches forward off balance, but Jake catches himself by bracing both hands against the grass. You're wrong, Jake hisses to himself before either of the others can say anything. His voice is low, inaudible to anyone not directly next to him, but Mark and Stephen can hear him just fine. Harrow was a mass murderer who believed in predestination. I'm the comic retribution who believes in taking things into my own hands. I am not Arthur Harrow. I killed Arthur Harrow.
That was uncalled for, Mark,
Stephen says, and Jake blinks in surprise. Stephen's protecting him?
What, you're protecting the murderer now?
Mark asks, equally incredulous.
Stephen, you threatened to put us in jail because you found out I had a gun. You wouldn't even let me beat people up out of self-defense. You're gonna let him get off scot-free. You know more than anyone how much I've changed, Stephen says defensively. Besides, you can't forget, Jake saved our lives. Twice.
Jake scoffs, ignoring the warmth that sparks in his chest when he hears Stephen say his name. Way more than that, I just saved their lives 2 days ago. That takes a while to register. When it does, Mark's voice is hesitant.
The alley. It's cold. That was real?
Real as can be, hombre. Medically, you were dead. You should be dead by now.
How did you...
Stephen trails off.
The armor.
The armor, Jake agrees. Then I made sure they wouldn't come after you again.
What, you killed him too?
But there's less bite in Mark's voice now, and that's a start. They're alive. All 8 of them. Jake says tiredly. I promised the leader if she ever touched you again, I'd finish what I started. But I didn't kill him. Didn't kill any of them.
You're the one who bought the flowers too, I reckon,
Stephen asks.
And dressed us up.
Jake shrugs. Guilty as charged. There's a pause, and then,
your fashion sense is terrible,
Stephen says unexpectedly, and it startles a grin out of Jake. You're full of shit, Stephen. He rims back, and it's almost heart-achingly easy to make Stephen laugh. We look good. You said it yourself.
Only because we were on a time crunch. You wear a dark button-up with khakis. Khakis!
You told Mark to wear a dark button-up. I wore the damn button-up. No clue what you've got to complain about.
Yeah, but I would have told Mark to stay away from the bloody khakis, wouldn't I?
They're both laughing then, not just from the bit, but from a multitude of other things. Residual adrenaline from the museum, the shock of Jake's existence, the emotional weight of all that he said. They're laughing because it's easier to do than anything else at the moment. Mark's gone, Stephen says after the grins fade. I think he's taking a time out, so to speak. Jake's quiet for a second as he idly fiddles with the grass beneath him, feeling its soft sharpness. I've thought about this moment a lot, revealing myself, telling the two of you who I am. Self-thought, things are well on track. What do you mean by that? Mark hates me, Jake says, and it comes out smaller than he wanted. He meant it to be flippant casual, but all he manages is a mournful sort of quiet. You should hate me. It's Stephen's turn to pause, and for a terrifying second, Jake thinks he's left too. You and Mark are alike in many ways, Stephen says thoughtfully, eventually. Protective, short-fused, sense of justice. Only difference is he feels guilt. Not saying you're emotionless, don't get me wrong, but Mark feels a lot of guilt, for many things. I know what you mean, Jake murmurs. He's been there since Mark's childhood. He's seen the extent of how bad it is firsthand. Randall, Stephen says gently, that is, our mother making him think it was all his fault, becoming a mercenary, the incident with Layla's father, all the things Khonshu's made him do, dragging me into the mess on top of it all. He's tired, Jake. Tired and scared, and he's trying so hard to put it behind him, but it's hard. I know, Jake whispers. Lo entiendo, Stephen, believe me. I know you do, Jake, but let me finish, yeah? Stephen's voice is not unkind. He also seems to realize that saying Jake's name out loud creates a grounding effect. Give it up for the emotional protector of the goddamn century. Jake swallows a lump in his throat. Yeah, okay. If I'm here because Mark needed emotional comfort, then you're probably our physical protector, Stephen continues. And that means you're the one doing all the dirty work. The things Mark hated doing, the things he just can't do. And that includes hurting people, killing them. This is nothing Jake doesn't know, nothing Jake hasn't traced out in his mind hundreds of times. But Stephen presses on. So Mark's going to be hesitant. You're, well, after all, everything he's trying to avoid. It's different when Stephen says it, because then it's not just in Jake's head. Stephen must somehow sense Jake's conflict because his voice softens. Mark's many times. Mark's many things, Jake. A wanker at times. Yes, emotionally incompetent, absolutely, but he's no idiot. He needs you just as much as he needs me, and he knows that. He just found out I exist, Jake points out. And I'm sure a lot of pieces are falling into place for him. Stephen agrees. He'll understand. You've saved his life in more ways than the physical. Without you, I think he would have stopped trying a long time ago. Stopped trying. I think he would have lost himself, Stephen murmurs thoughtfully. And you? Jake blurts before he can stop himself. No moral reservations about sharing a body with a killer? He curses himself out mentally. Why the fuck is he so intent on self-sabotaging? But Stephen remains mild, either oblivious or acting as a deterrent to Jake's turmoil. Mike, one of the first things I ever learned about Mark was that he supposedly killed a bunch of hostages in cold blood. You kind of learn to bounce back from things like these. It's a light-hearted tone, but Stephen sobers fast. Are you asking if I hate you? No. Yes. Not if the answer is yes. Because if you are, then after everything I've said, you're impossibly thicker than Mark. Jake blinks because Stephen sounds almost angry, and in his surprise he accidentally slips back into Spanish. ¿Qué dices? What are you saying? He asks, but behind it is the culmination of years of doubt and fear, of being constantly afraid that the only two people he cared about in the world would hate him for existing. So he asks, what are you saying? But beyond that is a silent plea. Please let me be wrong. We don't hate you, Stephen says, infinitely gentle. And those 4 words, those 4 tiny infinitesimal words, lift an unfathomable weight off his shoulders. Taking a shuddering breath, Jake realizes belatedly that he's crying. He shivers, and all of a sudden, it's Stephen who's fronting. Fuck, sorry, Don't worry about it, mate, Stephen reassures, lifting an arm to wipe away the tears. He draws his knees up, hugging them against his chest, and in a way, he's hugging Jake as well. Quietly but firmly, he murmurs, We need you. We've always needed you, even when we didn't know it. And you know what? I'll say it.
Thank you for looking out for the absolute mess of a system that we are.
Jake ups out a small laugh. You guys are kind of a mess.
That's putting it bloody lightly.
Steven chuckles.
Jake, I don't hate you. Mark doesn't hate you.
Si tú los dices,
If you say so. He's still doubtful, of course he is. If it was him, he'd probably hate himself too. He'll just need a bit of time to come around. But I promise he does not hate you. Jake doesn't think he's ever heard the other sound so wholeheartedly sincere.
I'd say something for Stephen Grant.
And something inside him lets out an impossibly large exhale of relief.
Yeah, Jake thinks dazedly. Yeah, okay.
Stephen lifts a hand and presses it against his own chest. For the other, it's distant, but there, the warmth of the touch. It means more than he thinks it possibly can.
Thank you,
Jack says hoarsely.
And there's a lot more that he wants to say than just thank you, but for now, it's all he can manage.
Stephen seems to understand anyway. You're a part of us now. There's a smile to his words. Well, you always have been. But now it's, like, official, isn't it?
That depends. Did I pass initiation?
Given that you've saved our lives several times, I'd say that and then some.
You saved my ass back then too, Jake points out. If it weren't for you right now, we'd be in Parisian jail, being charged for Parisian murder, knee-deep in Parisian shit.
We should really get the bloody Parisian fog out of here then. Stephen jokes. He gets to his feet slowly and says, I assume you'll be flying back? Via armor?
Guess so,
Jake says, and the next thing he knows, he's the one in control of the body, swaying on his feet. He hears Stephen It was lovely meeting you, Jake Lockley.
Jake bites his lip, but it's not enough to stop a smile from spreading across his face. Maybe, just maybe, this is one good thing he can have. It's good to meet you too, Stephen Grant.